Hello everyone, today we are going to take a look at a relatively unknown, at least compared to the most famous cases like Roswell or Kecksburg, mysterious case of a possible UFO crash dating back to 1941, which happened near the town of Cape Girardeau in the state of Missouri in the United States. On the night of 12th of April 1941, a resident of Cape Girardeau, Pastor William G. Hoffman, aged 52, of the Red Star Baptist Church, was called by the local police enforcement, namely by the sheriff's deputy, to travel immediately to a crash site in order to dispense last rites to the victims of the accident. A car was sent from the sheriff's department to pick the pastor up. Curiously enough, the car was not a police vehicle, and the journey took the pastor somewhere between 10 and 15 miles out of the town. When he arrived at the crash site, he first noticed that there was no crashed car to be seen anywhere, but instead there was a metal spaceship which apparently experienced a fatal malfunction. The pastor was allegedly escorted by the sheriff to 3 victims of the crash, all of whom were not human. 2 of the fatalities were already dead at the time the pastor arrived, one was still alive. The non-human beings were allegedly identical, as if they were released from a cloning machine of sorts, and were identified as the famous Greys, standing at about 4 feet tall. Their bodies seemed to have suffered extensive injuries from the inside, as if they were incinerated in contact with our atmosphere. The pastor was apparently sworn to secrecy by the military on the spot, who were either already present at the site by the time of his arrival or have arrived shortly thereafter on the grounds of national security. The pastor also managed to peek into the crashed craft while at the side, where he saw a chair which looked like made of a leather-like material, gauges and dials he did not recognize at all, and writing similar to glyphs or Egyptian hieroglyphs. Once all was said and done, the pastor was taken back home. Despite the oath he had made just a short time before, William Hoffman told the story as it happened to his wife and 2 sons. A few weeks later, a man from the same congregation gave Pastor Hoffman a photograph depicting 2 men holding one of the aliens, and this has become a prized family possession for the pastor. The photograph was clearly remembered by the pastor's daughters as well. Pastor Hoffman himself eventually died in 1959 at the age of 71. One of the pastor's sons already died before him, still during World War II. The crashed craft and the alien bodies were supposedly taken initially to the Saxton, Missouri Institute of Aeronautics and eventually even transferred to an underground facility beneath the government buildings in Washington, D.C. This ties to another thread of the story. There were 2 sisters living in Ohio. They were alive and happy to be interviewed as late as a few years ago. Their father, one Reverend Turner Hope, was allegedly taken to said underground facility in the American capital by the Secretary of the State, Colonel Hall, at some point during the 1940s, where he saw the alien bodies. During the visit, Reverend Hope had apparently seen, as he described it, 3 large jars, one of which hosted one non-human body with large eyes, and that Vannevar Bush, related to the 2 presidents of the same last name, carried out studies on the vehicle retrieved from the same crash and found an atomic-based propulsion system using neutrons in the drive of the vehicle. Bits of said technology were intended for use in the atomic bomb program underway in the USA, thus tying it into Operation Paperclip, which involved scientists working on the atomics in the 1940s. The original story involving Pastor Hoffman was later retold by his granddaughter Charlotte, who heard the story from her father and son-in-law of Pastor Hoffman, who also mentioned the involvement of firefighters who participated in the rescue operation at the crash site and extinguished fire which followed the crash. This is debated as a fact, as the local area at the time of the year when the alleged crash occurred is quite wet, and it is possible that the crash would not necessarily require an effort from the firefighters to be extinguished. Another thing which is sometimes raised by skeptics is that the entire story involving the crash is quite similar to the one relating to the Roswell crash. Which one is the original and which one is the copy, then, is the natural question following the logic here. Charlotte also presented sketches of how she remembered the photo and how the alien beings allegedly looked like, as she learned from the story from her grandmother, wife of Pastor William, in 1984, just a few days before her passing. The photo itself was gone in mysterious circumstances. Several years after the incident, Pastor Hoffman was approached by a family friend who knew the story and who offered the photo to be taken to the press. And the friend and the photograph were never to be seen again after that night. Another doubtful fact is that the operation involving early arrival of the military at the crash site and the following procedure concerning the retrieval Sounds like something already happening at the time such procedures would be established, so in 1950s at the earliest, following the procedures possibly imported from Italy together with the craft crashed there in 1933. Let us remember that these would have arrived in the US in the very late 1944 at the earliest, so over 3 years after the Cape Girardeau event. The story was also studied by the famous UFO researcher Leonard Stringfield. He found 2 more witnesses, one of the Hoffman family and a member of the sheriff's department from 1941. Stringfield managed to confirm that Hoffman was indeed a minister of the local congregation, as well as reports of a plane crash from the time, with no mention of aliens but with a mention of the military removing the crash debris from the site, and that members of the fire department were sworn to secrecy by the soldiers. Where my own opinion stands here, I think that the story is quite compelling in abstraction. It tells well and sounds plausible. It involves all the classical elements we usually associate with UFO crashes, i.e. secrecy, involvement of the military secret programs and eventual recovery of evidence, threats issued to the witnesses and so on. Then again, there is little of tangential evidence that would confirm the accident as such, aside from the study conducted by Stringfield. All the documentation usually associated with UFO crashes and possible retrievals, at least in the USA, follows the Roswell event of 1947, and nothing suggests the same level of government involvement as early as 1941, which would be a natural conclusion had the Cape Girardeau event really occurred. While there is no reason to doubt the family members of the minister involved in the story, or rather 2 ministers, there is also nothing quite substantial that corroborates the reports either. Therefore, I consider this particular case interesting but doubtful, unless more evidence sees the light of the day at least. However, it is still a part of the UFO lore of today and is thus worth covering. In the next video we are going to examine another case from the 1940s. In the meantime, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. It means the world to me and helps spread the knowledge regarding our friends from out of town, as Lou Elizondo calls the non-human intelligence visiting us. Take care, and I will see you soon in another video.